Well, Senner, welcome to the Preconstruction Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
The weather looks beautiful down there in Raleigh.
It is. We finally got a little bit of sun here. It's been a lot of rain for the last couple of weeks, so I know we've got a few job sites that are very happy to see the sun these days.
I would say that it's all hands to the pump now. The good weather's coming in. Well, listen, thank you
That's
very
right.
much for making the time to speak with us. We've been in dialogue for a couple of months now, just kind of getting an idea in your background, and I think your background right now is exactly what the Pre-Construction Podcast is all about. It's all about pre-construction technology. It's all about getting a bigger picture on what's going on. So I'm really looking forward to this. For the guys and gals that don't know you well, give us a quick 30-second overview of where you're at, what you're doing, and who you're working with.
Yeah, so I'm vice president of pre-construction with Skanska at our North Carolina, Virginia office. So we're based out of Durham here. Obviously, I think folks know Skanska, but our business here in North Carolina is generally a CM at risk business. I've been with Skanska 15 years now on both the pre-con and operations side of the business. But we've got a great team here of about 15 folks that support a wide range of projects: higher ed, healthcare, commercial, municipal type work. So yeah, it's a great spot to be. A lot going on.
Good, exciting. Yeah, looking forward to getting through all of it. I'm just conscious of that 1 hour or so that we have. We could probably stretch this to 5 hours easy. So yeah, let's just jump right back then. Duke University, did your bachelor's. Give us an idea of what you touched on during the bachelor's. I mean, you may have listened to a couple of other podcasts, but it's something that I really like to dive deep into about what the kids are actually getting taught and how relevant it is.
Yeah, so I did structural engineering for my undergrad. It was a relatively theoretical program at the time, and I've stayed pretty involved with the engineering school at Duke over the years, and they've made some really good shifts to be a more practical, hands-on engineering program and integrating a lot more hands-on design into the curriculum since I graduated. But I did a lot with some different extracurricular organizations, a motorsports team, that really got me some great experience in kind of hands-on design and construction and understanding how you design to make something buildable. And we also had a great program that was just kind of getting conceived while I was at Duke, the Smart House, which was a living learning laboratory that really a dorm that students lived in, but were able to do projects on new innovative technologies, tremendous sustainability efforts. So the timing worked out great. I've been very fortuitous in my career with some good timing, and the Smart House was just starting its design of that actual building when I was a sophomore, junior, senior. And so I was able to be involved kind of as an owner's rep, essentially, and a voice of the student perspective through that design process. So I got to attend a lot of design meetings with the architect, engineers, which really gave me tremendous insight into what the process looked like. Which was unique because Duke didn't have classes in construction management. There were a couple classes in architectural engineering, which I took and were great, but that was kind of what opened the door to me to the whole building process and all the opportunities that were there.
Brilliant. And then give me a quick rundown on the Masters. What was the thinking behind the Masters? Was that something that you always wanted to do, even through your bachelor's? Or was that something that you thought, you know what, I might as well continue on here and secure it?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of an interesting circumstance. As I got into my senior year, only needed a few more credits to graduate just because of AP credits and a couple things through my undergrad. And Duke being a relatively small structural engineering program, the capstone design class that I had to take to graduate was only offered in the spring. So there's no way for me to graduate early. I had to be there for the full year. So it was down to either double majoring in econ, taking a few extra fun phys ed classes, or Duke had this 1-year Masters of Engineering Management program, which is sort of a condensed MBA program for engineers and other technical majors that really hits on the management, the project management, the finance, the intellectual property, all those kind of core business skills that a lot of engineers don't get right away unless you go back and get an MBA. So that was a really interesting opportunity, and I was able to start taking those classes essentially during my senior year, and I stayed 1 extra semester to finish up the master's. And it was a very interesting program. I think the dividends that it paid really came later in my career at year 7, 8, 9, 10 and beyond. I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that the first couple years out of school, I felt like I wasn't getting to use a whole lot of what I learned in that master's program. But certainly as the years went on, I found myself drawing back on a lot of that information, especially as I got involved in more kind of national initiatives and cultural change management things within Skanska.
Brilliant. Yeah, because that was my next question is, do you think it was valuable, and would you kind of give advice to young people considering doing a master's right now at just straight after bachelor's? Would you advise them to do it then, or would you advise to wait 5 or 6 years and then maybe do it on a part-time basis?
Yeah, I think, a lot of that depends on the individual's circumstances and what their ambitions are. I sort of knew going in that I wasn't someone who wanted to always be out at job sites building jobs. I love that part of the business and really enjoyed my time doing that. But I knew I was interested in tackling more of the larger business type challenges. And so from that perspective, having some of those additional master's courses really helped me. And I knew personally I didn't want to get out of that mode of thinking and have to restart kind of the academic side of my brain again in a few years. So it made more sense for me to just keep doing that, get the master's done, and move on into industry. But I think everybody's a little bit different, and depending on kind of your circumstances and really what your end goals are from the program, either way can work for people.
Brilliant. Yeah. And then of course finish the masters. Now you're ready to rock and roll in the big bad world of construction, straight into Skanska on the operations side. How valuable were those operational projects as a project engineer, project manager for the 5, 6, 7 years that you did them?
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting. Actually, I was hired to go into the operations side of the business, but the project that I was going to start on ended up getting delayed, hung up in pre-construction. And so I did an internship between my undergrad and the last semester of my master's, and ended up doing that internship essentially with the pre-construction team because of that delay in the project timing. And because of that, when I got hired full time, they brought me back into the pre-con team. They wanted to bring me on, and so I spent my first 3 years or so in pre-con, and kind of reached a point where it was obvious that I needed to go out in the field, see how things were built, just to take those next steps in my career. So spent about 8 years then in operations. I got to build a couple of great projects with some great teams, and really challenging, unique projects that were very collaborative, which again, some of that I think was lucky circumstance that the timing worked out really well. But that was just tremendously important for me in my growth and development, understanding how things get built. And it provided me that springboard to come back to pre-construction then, which is about 4 years ago, and have a much better perspective on how we plan our projects, not just from an estimating and cost standpoint, but from all the other things that we have to think about, the logistics, the schedule, and just kind of shepherding that whole process, the interface between the design team, the owner, all of our internal stakeholders to try to make that project successful and set it up to execute well when it does start construction.
Brilliant. Yeah. So full cycle. You really did get the benefit of it. And then Raleigh, was there any particular types of projects that you guys were doing, or were you working on national projects?
Yeah, so I mean, myself locally, I've tended to be particularly involved in higher ed projects. We do a tremendous amount of work at NC State, at Duke, and really at almost all the higher ed universities here in North Carolina, Virginia, between Western Carolina, UNC, Longwood, Virginia Tech, UVA, Radford, William and Mary, VSU. We're a big higher ed builder in this region. We also do a tremendous amount of healthcare, and a fair amount of kind of public work for the local counties and cities in this area as well. So it's given me a good opportunity to really have a diverse background of different types of projects as well. But to your point, Skanska does a great job of resource sharing around the country. So we often will pull in expertise from other regions and support other regions as well. I've had opportunities to work with our teams in Arizona and California and New York, New Jersey, and Atlanta and Florida, Philly, helping them with pursuits and projects through the pre-con process. So it's made it very easy to kind of plug in and help lend some of that expertise where it's helpful.
Brilliant. Yeah. So you started in pre-con, you went to operations, you're back in pre-con. I hope we're not going to lose you to the dark side again, are we?
Well, I tell you, I love the pre-con space because it's such a great opportunity to influence projects early on. That was one of the things as I was working through operations and I loved the problem solving aspects of being out in the field and all those challenges that were thrown at you every day. But I really started to realize that the opportunity to influence the direction that the job goes in terms of what that final building looks like. I'm particularly passionate about sustainability. So some of those decisions, a lot of that happens at the very beginning of the project. So once we're in construction and you're out building a job, the opportunity to influence that end result is fairly diminished. But when we're working on the job in the early phases with our project planning group, there really is much more opportunity to impact the direction the job goes. And so I love that piece of it. I love that I can touch a number of different jobs. And it also gives me the opportunity to plug into more national initiatives, whether it's technology, data, sustainability, a lot of those things that I get excited about. So I think a lot of times when you're in the operations side of the business, it's really easy to fall into that trap. Being at the job site, you've got your head down, you're focused on building your job, and you lose sight of some of the bigger things that are going on around you. So being in the project planning world here has given me an opportunity to tie into a lot of those things more frequently.
Yeah. And you touched on a couple of those just now, the pre-construction technology side of it, because you are heavily involved and have been for the last 5 or 6 years on Skanska's efforts within pre-construction technology, but most importantly as well, data. So let's jump straight into the pre-construction technology first, so that we can give a kind of a holistic approach to it, and then how the data integrates with that. So 5 years ago, let's go back. What was the thinking within Skanska 5 years ago about pre-construction technology? How was it viewed? Was that the start of it, do you think? BIM VDC Assemble?
Well, yeah, it's funny actually. When I did my first tour of duty, so to speak, in pre-con back in, I guess would have been 2006, 2007, 2008, that time frame, I was actually part of a small national team that was looking at using BIM in pre-construction. We were doing a lot of takeoff with Revit, pulling quantities out of models. That was obviously pretty early on in that journey. So there were a lot of challenges we were working through on model quality, standards, how we make sure the information is accurate. But that gave me a really early exposure to what was possible. Obviously, I left for operations for a period of time, and by the time I came back, there were great strides now in other programs like Assemble that make the visualization and extraction process a lot easier for estimators. You don't have to worry about folks learning a program that's a little bit more, or maybe a little less user intuitive, like Revit is. So that's made it a lot easier now for us over the last 5 years to really push forward on helping our folks rethink the quantity takeoff process from what happens in 2D to looking at a building in 3D. And I think the thing that we've really tried to focus on with people is the idea that doing takeoff out of a model is not just, hey, give me the quantities that are in the model, right? We do so much of our work is progress design work. Because we're a CM at risk, we're involved in almost all of our projects in the schematic phase all the way through going to GMP. And so almost all the estimates that we do are on partial design documents. They're incomplete by nature. And so our job is to fill in the gaps. And our folks are good at doing that. And they've been very good at doing that in 2D. And they understood how to take a set of 2D documents and figure out how they need to fill things in OST or whatever other program they're using. But helping them transition that mindset and that mentality to 3D, because the natural inclination is, well, I've got a model, it's got quantities, here are my quantities. But the reality is we have to get them capable and fluent in looking at a model, dissecting it, understanding what's accurate, what's not accurate, and being able to kind of get in the designer's head a little bit and understand how they're modeling the information that we're getting, to understand where the geometries are accurate, where they're not accurate, so that we can figure out, okay, here's the information we can get out of the model, but now what do we have to do with that to produce our estimate? Because most times it's not going to be as simple as, here's my quantity of steel out of the model, but we have to think about what's missing, what's incomplete, what's going to happen between this set of DD documents to the final 100% CDs, because that's where we want our estimate to be, even at the DD phase. So that's kind of been the process that we've really been focusing on with our folks over the last few years, is helping them transition that filling in the gaps mindset to a 3D space and get more comfortable using tools like Assemble to QC a model to really be able to use it to its full advantage.
Yeah, and again, filling in the gaps is really difficult unless you've been on the field for 5, 10 years, really understanding that. So really, the only way to do it, filling in the gaps, is through experience or historical data, is going through it and looking through it. Okay, very good. And 5 years obviously is a long time. 5 years ago, the pre-construction technology, BIM, VDC, Assemble, was that the start of the collection of data within Skanska? How did that process come about? How, did you guys have to do a blueprint, a foundations of how it was going to go?
Yeah, so I think we were probably like a lot of other folks in that historical data. When we were doing benchmarking exercises or conceptual efforts, uh, people had their own little spreadsheet where they had kept track of jobs and what they cost, and you'd have below the line factors where you're escalating it to today's dollars or normalizing it across regions, and those spreadsheets would get passed around from person to person, office to office, and uh, you know you kind of had to cross your fingers and hope that the information was accurate and hadn't been kind of manipulated too much over whatever history it had, because who knows where that file came from necessarily. And so we realized there was a tremendous opportunity to do more with standardizing some of that information, cleaning it up, and not just thinking about cost, but thinking about some of the other things that we could look at from a benchmarking standpoint. And so to your question, about 5 years ago, we looked at how we could totally revamp that benchmarking process. And we actually sat down and looked at our kind of 5 core market sectors, and we looked at each one individually and thought, here's the data that we would love to have if we were analyzing buildings. And when we looked at it system by system with a uniformat approach, so here's the cost data we would want in uniformat structure. Here's the level of detail we would want. And then for each building system, here is what we would want. It's how much concrete is in the foundations, how much rebar, what type of structure is it? Is it on, what type of foundation system does it have? All the way through every system in the building. And then for each market sector, what is some of the market sector specific data that we would want to have in terms of how's the program allocated, or what are some of those unique factors? And so we went through this whole journey of identifying all of that data, getting a standardized process to collect it and QC it and organize it, and ultimately then bring it together, aggregate it, and visualize it. And you'd mentioned earlier about that challenge of filling in the gaps, and how do you do it? It's either experience or historical data. Well, now we've built a tool that allows us to put historical data kind of at the fingertips of everybody on our team, so that the younger estimators who are 2 or 3 years of experience can go in and see, hey, from a steel structure, looking at lab buildings in this region, what do we expect to see in terms of a pounds per square foot for a steel structure, or how many cubic yards of concrete in the foundation system, which we think is really helpful to them to kind of catch them up on some of that historical intuition that our folks who have 20 or 30 years doing this, they know that kind of stuff right off the top of their head. But this really makes that information more accessible to everybody within our project planning group.
Yeah, because this is my big, it's not a pet hate, but the idea that you can't go straight into pre-construction without field experience, I think we're kind of eliminating a lot of candidates, and especially graduates, that want to get involved in construction, can see themselves in construction, but don't want to go in and lay bricks or do drywall to get that experience to go into pre-construction. They actually can, and if they've got that left-hand side of the brain thinking, they can go straight into pre-construction through BIM modeling, through historical data, learn as quickly as someone. And listen, I'm not saying that you can't do that. And the best way is definitely to go and build something before you go into pre-construction. But I just think because pre-construction and estimating, the talent, there's such a lack of talent there. We've got to open our minds up to bringing people straight out of and IT people preferably. So competing with the big IT companies, bringing them in, and merging, and kind of like a reverse mentorship, merging the 20 years of experience of the guy that had on site with the IT brain. So this fits in perfectly. And how difficult was it kind of getting buy-in from leadership and other parts of and other departments within Skanska?
Yes, I mean, we had leadership buy-in from the top. Our national executive vice president who leads our project planning effort, who is actually my first boss, who hired me into Precon here. He was leading this charge from day one. So that was critical, obviously, because one of the big challenges we faced early on was once we said, hey, here are these couple hundred data points that we want to collect on projects, that took some time, right? So we were asking our teams around the country, hey, we need you to collect all of this information when you finish your GMP and wrap up this project. And some of it was, hey, you got to trust us. There's going to be a pot of gold at the end of this rainbow, but right now we're still building the rainbow, so to speak. And that was a challenge. It took a lot of constant reminding that, hey, this is important. We need to do this, and explaining the value proposition to people. But the reality was we couldn't show them what the final product was going to look like until we had the data to actually start, building the tool. So, there was a lot of pushing and cajoling to get people bought into the data collection process until we could at least get a critical mass to start building the initial reports and visualizations. But once we got to that point, then it really could pick up some steam, because we could show people, hey, this is why you collected all that data. This is why you spent an extra, 8 hours at the end of the project filling out all this information, because now look at this. Now we can see data on 100, 200, 300 projects and start to use this to draw conclusions, whether we're doing, early phase conceptual estimates or trying to fill in the gaps or validate those SD or DD efforts, or trying to be smarter about how we do value management, because now we can look at how a project compares to a bunch of other projects and see where things are trending, above or below where we might expect it to, and use data to really drive more informed decision making there as well. So I think having something that we could really show people how it applies to their workflows, that really helped connect the dots and build the momentum. But it's a journey. It really takes time, and it's funny now that we're involved in kind of trying to replicate some of what we've done with this tool more broadly throughout the business. People want those results really quickly, and we have to remind people what we did in Precon has been a 5-year journey now, and it's taken that long to really bear fruit. And there's an old proverb, I think it's a Chinese proverb that we like to remind people of, that the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. And it's kind of the same thing with a data journey. The best time to start that journey was 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And now the second best time is today. So if we didn't start 5 years ago, let's at least start making the investments today on what we can do going forward. And so that's really where we are now, looking at what other parts of our process can we really standardize the data collection, whether it's how we approach value management or how we approach some of our other items more in the field, constructability, pursuit efforts, how we build teams, all those kind of things. There are just tremendous opportunities now as we think about applying that kind of data-driven mindset throughout the business.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. The long game, and you can see that. I mean, I deal with our top 400s right down to the one-man bands, startup construction companies, and you can see that the companies that are playing the long game, and they will get the benefits of that. How satisfying, from your point of view, was it? I mean, you've been doing it now for 5 years. I mean, are you seeing it every day, every project? Are you just seeing the benefit of it day in, day out?
It was interesting. We had a project that we were pursuing for a public school system here. It was late last year. And it was a CM at risk project, kind of typical procurement in this region, where we submit an RFP. It's generally a qualifications-based selection. And submit the RFP, we do the interview, and we go through our interview. It's a very short interview, and we have a piece on the pre-construction process. I have a very short segment on Skanska metrics, just because we're so short on time. We finish the interview, we do Q&A. The very first thing that the client said was, before we start questions, I just want to say how impressed I was with that data tool. It really is, a tremendous value that we see in using that. And so, it's incredibly rewarding when you hear a client start Q&A with a statement about how impressed they are with something you've built. And so we're starting to see that more and more across the business as we get more savvy with how to use the tool, how to articulate its value, and get it in front of clients. I mean, it's I don't mean to get kind of down a rabbit hole here, but applying data in our industry is still such a new and unique thing. And so, we saw it as we were doing some of the training around how to use the tool for our people throughout pre-con. And it's just different. People have to get into that kind of analytical mindset, and being able to articulate the value add of data takes time for people, because it's just something different. And so, we have progressed a tremendous amount in how we sell this tool and how we articulate the value proposition to our clients, even from where we were when we first developed the tool and rolled it out. And I think that's helped a lot as well. It's easy to build something and want to show it off, and you can confuse the hell out of people because you've got a whole bunch of charts and visuals and graphs, and you're talking data. But I think we've gotten a lot smarter about how we storytell with data and communicate the value add. I don't want to say in layman's terms, but in ways that really resonate with people, more than simply just blowing them away with a whole bunch of data and visualizations.
Yeah, and well, you hit something on the nail on the head there right now. Being able to discuss things in layman's terms is a skill, as far as I'm concerned, and it's pretty evident that you're really good at it. But if you can do that and communicate really well and visually show them, I mean, that has to be a winner, because, I mean, as we know, estimators and pre-construction generally a little bit on the introverted side, so communication doesn't come natural. Now, that's not everyone, that's just the kind of what I see, but being able to show people visually, and we're all visual people, whether it's internal stakeholders or clients, architects, designers, so that's valuable. And just without giving too much away, the visualization part, is that built into your tool at Skanska, or have you added on a visualization tool off the shelf?
Yeah, so we use Microsoft Power BI as our visualization platform. So we collect and aggregate all the data in a separate tool, and then Microsoft Power BI basically points to all that data. We developed custom reports, obviously, that part of our whole process on what data do we want to collect, how do we want to use it. Kind of the end of that, not the end, but one of the later steps in that journey is how do we want to visualize that information to help our people use it to draw insights, right? So, and part of that is the whole challenge of how do we appropriately normalize the data, because all the buildings that we build are very different. They're very, and we don't tend to build simple buildings that are repeated over and over. They tend to be the more complex, challenging, whether it's site constraints or addition renovation stuff or whatever it might be. So really being thoughtful about how we organize and present the data in a way that helps people draw the right conclusions from the information. That's really a critical piece of it, and something that we had to go through a lot of iterations to arrive where we are now. And we actually, one of the things I think we've done really well is embrace this plan, do, check, act methodology in our process. And we've got a team right now that's working on kind of what we call Gen 2. So what are the revisions that we want to make to the tool to continue to improve it? What data are we missing? What data are we not using? What visualizations should be tweaked or adjusted to make them more helpful to our people? So that's a constant iterative process to really refine, because it's tricky. Again, people aren't used to looking at visualizations and drawing conclusions. So it's really important, I think, from our end in building the tool to make sure that we're setting them up to be successful and building it in a way that helps them draw the right insights. And the other piece of that, you were kind of tiptoeing around this, is helping people with kind of data literacy. And this was an interesting thing, when we rolled out the tool, and it's kind of like, here it is, go use it. And we realized very quickly that we needed to do more training, not just on, hey, here's Power BI, here's how to navigate it, here's how to filter and access the reports and all that stuff, but here is how to apply it to a process. Here's how, here's what visuals you might want to look at in this given scenario. So here's, we give people examples, and we kind of say, okay, you're doing an estimate and you've taken off the structural steel, and maybe it's design development, and you've come up with a certain tonnage, maybe it's 11 pounds per square foot on average over the whole building. Now what? Okay, well, here's a visual that shows you the pounds of steel per square foot, and here's how you could add in your project to see how it compares to all these other projects. Okay, now what? Well, how does your project stack up? Is it a little low? Well, what conclusions would you draw there? Is it low because the design is incomplete and maybe the engineer of record hasn't thought about the lateral bracing system yet? Okay, well, that's a conversation that you could have with them about, hey, is there maybe some more steel that could show up in this design when we get to 100% CDs? Is there an allowance that we might want to add to accommodate that, and use the data to determine what that allowance is? Or maybe our tonnage is higher than we might expect. Well, is there a reason in the design that would be the case? Is the geometry kind of funky? Are there, transfer beams because of column layouts that are driving the tonnage maybe to be higher than we expect? Are there vibration requirements because of the program that are going to drive the tonnage up? Kind of getting people into this analytical thought process of why. You got to ask why 5 times to get to the root of the problem, to be able to couple their knowledge of cost drivers and building systems with the data to then help them work through that process and draw better conclusions and produce better estimates. So we really had to think about developing a training. We did develop a training that kind of got into a lot of those examples to help people understand how to use data in their process. Now we did that, and then we realized we need a little more training on things like data fluency, just kind of understanding, hey, here are different types of visuals: bar charts, pie charts, stacked bar charts, histograms, box and whisker plots, and when you can use different types of visuals to look at data in different ways and draw different conclusions. And so, that's been a side project of mine over the last couple of months, is building out a training around data literacy, just to help people understand how we think about data and data quality and data aggregations and basic data analysis, to help support some of that. Because there are some great examples of folks I've seen where they're using our tool and they gravitate right to, here's the average. Here's the average of the 15 projects. Well, there are some times when the average isn't what you want to look at. Maybe you want to look at the median of the data, because if you look at how it's distributed, you might have some outliers on one side of the data set, or something else going on that might be skewing the average. And so as we start using data a lot more in our workflows, we have to get a little bit smarter about some of the analysis to make sure that we're drawing the right conclusions through that process. And so we're working on some of that training. That's something that I'm have on my to-do list to try to get done and rolled out here in the next couple months, for our team, to really help them be a little bit more confident in kind of speaking that data language and using it the right way to draw the right conclusions through that process.
Brilliant. Yeah. And that's it. I mean, any sort of technology, any sort of change management, you got to pivot your way through it, and you will get, but I would imagine it's an ever changing landscape. Was there any, over the last 5 or 6 years, was there any kind of aha moment where you went, you know what, we're going to have to fundamentally pivot towards this, or this is going to be the future of where we're going, or we're going to have to use this technology, or we're going to have to kind of tweak it this way?
It's been really kind of fun to see as this pre-construction tool has picked up steam and gained adoption, and we've been more effective using it and adding value with it, and in turn then selling that to our clients, using it as a differentiator. It's been really fun to see the momentum that has picked up throughout the business, right? So now we've got another team that works with scheduling and schedule data, who are building a similar tool, and they're getting ready to roll that out so that we can analyze schedule data in a similar way to what we've done with cost and kind of building parameter data. I think in a lot of ways, the tool that we built on the pre-construction side has been sort of the early example of what is possible for us within Skanska, that has gotten everybody's eyes, wide open to the opportunity that's in front of us with data across the whole business. And I think that's been really great in getting everyone serious about the opportunities that are there. And again, the timing is really good because we're going through our business plan cycle right now, and so I'm part of that team that's working on how we develop our data strategy for the business plan. And so, a lot of that is thinking about how can we learn from what we've done on the pre-con side and kind of spread that success throughout the business. And, I think had we not had the success to point to and to learn from, it would be a more challenging process to spread it more broadly throughout the business.
Brilliant. And I hope, and there will be loads of people listening to this that'll be taking real confidence from this. Well, so thank you. A quick one as well I want to speak to you about, because I mean, as I said, there'll be a lot of people listening to this saying we're way at the beginning, we're way behind. What advice for a 120 million a year general contractor, commercial general contractor thinking about data and not knowing where to start? What quick 2 minutes advice would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly being a little bit of a smaller company certainly helps. We have the challenge of trying to standardize things across 15 or 20 offices around the country, which is its own challenge. But if you're just dealing with one office, one team, that makes things a little bit easier because it's all under your control a little bit more. But I think the big thing is just thinking about where you see opportunities to drive data-driven insights in your process, whether that's on the cost benchmarking side, conceptual estimating, estimate validation and filling in those gaps, improving your value management process. I think starting by really understanding where you want to get the value and what is that business problem you're trying to solve, I think that's critical, because a lot of times we can fall into the trap of, hey, here's a whole bunch of data that we have, whether it's data that's in our accounting tool, data that's in our estimating program, data that's in our HR system, whatever it might be. We have access to a lot of data, but it can become really easy to just take that and try to dump it into a visualization tool, whether that's Microsoft Power BI or something else. But I think to be really successful, you have to have your eyes on what is that value proposition, what is the business problem that I'm trying to solve, and then really focus in on what is the data that's going to help me solve that. Because again, there's so much data out there. You really, I think, want to focus in on where that value add is going to come. What are the key pieces of data that are going to help you solve those problems? And then focus in on that. So you're not trying to tackle everything. You're really zoning in on what's going to help you drive business decisions and solve that business problem, and avoid getting kind of bogged down in everything that's out there and just kind of trying to throw information into a report or a visualization for the sake of having a visualization. Really thinking through, how are people going to use this information? How are they going to draw conclusions from it? What data do I need to facilitate that? And then how can I make sure I've got good data? Because again, the data quality is critical, right? The old garbage in, garbage out situation. And so, something that we're doing as part of our overall data strategy is that prioritization, right? Here are all the things that we see as opportunities throughout the business, whether it's operations, HR, BD, pre-con. Here are all those opportunities. Here's the data it takes for each one of those. And then how hard is it to get that data and put that visualization together from an aggregation and analysis standpoint? And low complexity, high value, those are the easy targets. Some things are going to be a lot harder because the data is either not available or it's really dirty. It's messy because of how it's collected. It's not organized. We're using different project names and different tools, so it's hard to aggregate the data. So going through that process of assessing your data quality and how complex it'll be to build the visualization, that's important too, to understand just how much work is going to be involved in getting to that end state before you start too far down the path.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, you've got to have a clear pathway. You got to think about the final problem that you're going to be solved, and then kind of work back from there. And the big thing that I see is collaboration. Obviously, we call it the three-legged stool here on the Preconstruction Podcast. You've got the client, the architect, and the contractor. With that collaboration and what you're talking about, the tool, the data, the visualization, do you share, and even down as far as a subcontractor, what way is the data kind of distributed, and how much is there administrative kind of levels that people can look at? Does your client get to have a look at your data throughout the project? Is it not real time, but does it give them a good idea of how it's tracking, how the schedule's going? And then on the subcontractor side, their data, the data that they give you, are they involved at an early stage contributing to this?
Yeah, so a couple of things I would say there. first kind of at the major milestones where we're doing a full estimate deliverable at schematic design or design development. What we've done now is add a section to our deliverable book that focuses on analysis. So what we're doing is integrating visualizations from that tool into that final report and giving just quick little snapshots of some of the conclusions and analysis that we're doing. So, back to that steel example, hey, here's the steel that we saw in our analysis doing our takeoff for the project. Here's how we saw that compared to other projects. Here are the conclusions that we drew. Here are the conversations that we had. And here's the result of this. And Mr. Owner, we've included this analysis to try to fill that gap that we identified through our data-driven analysis. And so we're really trying to include that more in our deliverables to make sure that we're communicating and articulating how we're using data in that analysis process. We've also built a new tool. This was a great idea that came out of some of our folks in Seattle that really uses the same data in a target value design methodology. And so we're able to pull in data from our benchmarking tool, as well as pull in target data that a team would agree to. And the nice thing is it's not just target cost data by system, but it's target building parameter data. So, the same way that we're looking at those, hundreds of building parameters in our benchmarking tool, we're able to pull out, what are the key cost drivers that we want to focus on for this project, for this system? And then what are the targets that we want to set based on the historical data, based on the challenges of this individual project and the owner's goals, all those things, establish those targets. And so we're able to look at the historical data, the project specific targets, and then also look at kind of where the project stands at any point in time. And because of some of the things you probably know, Assemble's developed new integrations in the last year or so to Microsoft Power BI. We're able to directly integrate into that report Assemble data. So we're able to get the model from the design team, quickly pull quantities and integrate it into that report as well. So we're able to provide kind of much more frequent trend data to the project team on, hey, here's how our skin efficiency is trending. Here's how our cost per square foot of structural steel is trending. And we've gotten really great feedback from our project teams, especially from the designers, on being able to let them know how things are evolving between major milestones, so that if something does start trending, kind of a little bit above where we were anticipating, we can have that conversation 3 months earlier, that they're not spending all that time progressing the design and getting to the next milestone before they find out, hey, we've got a problem, we got to go back and change something. We're able to tighten up that feedback loop, let them know what we're seeing much more quickly, and make that course correction before they've invested a whole lot of resources going down a path. So that's been tremendously effective. We had some challenges around making some of these reports fully available externally, just from a technical licensing standpoint, but we've actually invested in a new web app that'll allow us to provide kind of external access to a lot of this data. So we're doing some beta pilots actually starting next month on that new tool. So we realized that was something that we really want to be able to put this information in the hands of our clients and design team partners to really help everybody on the project make those better decisions. But we had some technical hurdles we had to work through there. But the good news is we're hopefully through those, and this pilot goes well, and that'll be kind of the next frontier for us in the coming months.
Well, it's incredibly exciting, really, isn't it? I mean, 5 years work, seeing it to come to fruition. What does, without kind of being specific to Skanska, what does the future hold? I mean, where does this all end? Not that it ends, but what in 5 years will we be sitting talking about? I mean, there's no doubt the Preconstruction Podcast believes that the future to construction and within pre-construction is technology and talent. Without either, then there's a major pitfall. But what does the future hold when it comes to BIM, VDC, Assemble, data, estimating software? What do you think will be or in your, can you visualize what is the ideal?
Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly in the short term, kind of that 5-year horizon, I think we're going to push forward with really standardizing around model-based estimating and everything that we can do to make sure that our folks are spending their time on the value add activities, which, to the extent that they can avoid counting things on a set of documents, that's more time that they can then spend on using some of these more sophisticated data-driven benchmark tools to really analyze projects and draw insights and find better solutions for clients, and enhance the accuracy of the estimates that we're providing. So, we're not all the way there yet. There's still work that needs to be made. We need to continue to get smarter about that model QC process, and designers are going to get more sophisticated with how they model. We've obviously seen tremendous progress over the last 10 years on design models. So that's going to be critical. And I think the other thing that's going to continue happening kind of on the other side of the business is just data being driven throughout everything that we do. Where I think we've had some great advances on the project planning side of the business. I think we'll start seeing that more on the operations side of the business. And really, again, throughout HR, BD, everything that we do, I think that'll prompt a lot more challenging conversations, right? Like on the pre-con side, we've obviously, I think, made some great progress in the last 5 years. There's some interesting opportunities ahead of us around standardizing our approach to estimating. And we give people a lot of flexibility around how they create their estimates, what line items they use, how they describe things. And that inherently makes it challenging to do a whole lot of data aggregation and analysis around our actual estimates outside of the project cost. So, that was why we sort of had to standardize on the certain quantities and parameters that we wanted to collect in our benchmarking tool. But to be able to really directly tie that to the estimates that we're creating and the data in the estimates, that's going to be a more challenging process. And I think as we get more sophisticated around data and the tools that we have, that'll be a next frontier. I think it's a little bit further out there. Right now, there's still a little bit of brute force in terms of identifying the key parameters and pulling them out of the estimate and into our benchmarking tool. So to really be able to fully integrate and streamline everything in the process, from the model through the estimate to the kind of end of design benchmarking, that's a more challenging process, I think, from a data integrity standpoint, without limiting the flexibility that our teams need in developing good estimates. So that that's a topic that could be a 2 or 3 hour discussion. But I do think as we get more sophisticated and 5, 10, 15 years down the road, there are really opportunities there, but it's a more complicated problem, and there's so many kind of low-hanging fruit opportunities in front of us right now that we're going to take advantage of those first and come back to that harder problem in a few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what's most impressive with what you're saying. Well, because you guys are involved in so many different markets, that say a general contractor, mid-sized general contractor, only building warehouses or logistics centers or cold storage, like it's pretty standardized anyway. Whereas you guys are completely highly complex, ever evolving projects. You're able to use the data as well as you have been. I mean, that's really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to have the luxury of having buildings that were all very, very similar, all the exact same use, same design parameters. We don't get that luxury. We have to deal with the kind of reconciling in our process, our analysis, and it comes back to that whole idea of being able to blend your professional expertise and knowledge with the data to figure out how you have to kind of account for those inherent differences. And it's interesting. We do a good example. We do a lot of lab buildings, and a lot of them are higher ed, but some of them are kind of more private life science. But particularly on the higher ed side, you get such a spectrum of different program allocations between classroom, office, dry lab, wet lab, and that has a tremendous impact on the building cost, HVAC systems, skin, structure, plumbing, electrical needs, all that kind of stuff. And so, kind of a next gen for us is really being able to use some of the information that we have on the program side to understand how that influences and drives all those building parameters and the cost. And so, being able to layer some of that machine learning and AI on top of the data we have, I think will really help us draw some of those interesting insights that, if you're lucky enough to be able to just work on warehouses for the same client over and over, it can be a lot more straightforward to draw those insights, because you're not worrying about how you normalize for some of those other parameters that they're inherently different when you're doing these major complex commercial construction projects.
Yeah, brilliant. Love it. Well, listen, I don't want to take up any more of your time. This has been incredible. Thank you very much. As I said, we've only touched on data, historical data. There's probably 4 or 5 different topics that we're going to come back on within the Preconstruction podcast over the next 2 or 3 years. Really looking forward to following your story, but also Skanska's technology story as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and appreciate you tackling this topic. It's an important one, and a great opportunity for us all to move the industry forward.
Exactly. And that's the idea. I mean, to be able to learn and share and teach each other without sharing the secret sauce, but basically sharing just value adds and what we really should be looking at. So no, this has been really insightful.
Absolutely. Have a good rest of your day.